Hi, this is Anthony Parent of IRSMedic, and one constant trend we have been seeing is how sovereign countries around the world lay down their laws and hand them over to the IRS. It's been disgusting and it's been really frightening to see countries just not be countries anymore and do the bidding of whatever the US government wants to do. It's been bad with FATCA, but my guest, John Richardson, has an incredible story that's incredibly disturbing. And it's the nation of Croatia. The nation of Croatia entered into a tax treaty with the United States. And from there, John, what's exactly going on here?
Well, what's going on is that it's the first, at least according to the Treasury Department, it's the first tax treaty they've entered into in about a decade. As you may know, every 10 years or so, Treasury updates. It's what they call the U.S. Model Tax Treaty, which is sort of their starting point, what they want the treaty to be, the expectations. It looks as though that model tax treaty became, mostly at least, the treaty that Croatia signed. And what's significant about it is we've talked about the savings clause before, but the way this saving clause is written, it, as they always have historically, allows the United States to tax its residents as determined by the treaty and its citizens, irrespective of the treaty. But this one has a very, very interesting extension. And under this one, Croatia agrees to not only allow the United States to tax its residents and citizens, but are you ready for this?
Yep.
Croatia has agreed to allow the United States to impose tax on residents of Croatia who were former U.S. citizens or former green card holders.
What? All right, let's go. You have a Twitter thread on this here. Let's go to that. What? You got to be kidding me. Oh my God. Now, how does it affect Croatian citizens who aren't who are non-resident aliens, as we say in tax speak? Does it do anything to them?
Well, I mean, it has the usual provisions in it. If you're a Croatian non-U.S. person living in
Mhm.
Croatia, you would have the benefit of lower withholding rates on that, et cetera, in the way that it normally does. I mean, I'm not saying this tax treaty doesn't have benefits for certain people. It clearly does. But the problem that we've got, it seems to me, and the problem that nobody talks about, the deep, dark, dirty secret, is how these savings clauses are actually used to, maybe you want to click on the Threadreader app link there in the tweet.
Yeah.
Yeah, how the saving clause is actually used to expand the U.S. tax base into other countries. And this is really quite interesting
Oh
because I put this
my.
thread together yesterday and I looked again this morning and thought about it a little bit more. And what I realized is that everybody thinks of the saving clause in the same way that the OECD treaty does, or the UN tax treaty. If we go through the thread here, and I think it's a good way to explain. Stop with the first one there. So now, first of all, what a saving clause is, it's a standard part of tax treaties. I mean, there are three basic groups of tax treaties. We have the U.S. tax treaty, we have the OEC model tax treaty, we have the UN model tax treaty, okay, which we can talk separately about the UN one, which is quite interesting. They all have a saving clause, but if you were to click on the screenshots for that first tweet, we look at how the OECD, for example, below, go down
This
below,
one, yeah,
click there.
yeah.
Yeah, here's how the OECD tax convention describes the saving clause. This convention shall not affect the taxation by a contracting state of its residents. Okay, with its residents. Now, what that is designed to do is to make sure that people who actually live in the country somehow can't get lower tax rates by, some backdoor way of using a tax treaty or something like that. That's what it's really for. But you'll notice that the OECD tax convention speaks only of residents. Have a look at the UN one, which is just beside
Okay,
it.
yeah. And Here's the UN one.
Click on that one. Here's the UN model treaty as well. And these are recent, 2017. Yeah. The convention shall not affect the by contracting state of its residents, right? So in the world, the critical mass of thinking about how savings clauses operate is that they apply to residents, okay? But now let's go to the next thread, and we introduce the U.S. version of the saving clause.
Okay, here
we
go.
Down, which includes citizens. Citizens, right?
Oh, there it is.
Notwithstanding any provision, contract may tax its citizens. Look at that, citizens, all citizens.
Wow.
Right? Or residents. They know the difference, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you look at the part on the right, residents, that's exactly what the OECD treaty has or the UN treaty. But citizens on the left, right? Now that's really, really different. And where I'm going with this is that by agreeing to these treaties, what countries are doing is actually allowing the United States to impose taxation according to U.S. tax rules on the residents of those countries, the treaty partner country who happens to be a U.S. citizen, right?
Okay, I see it now. Okay, so
yeah, go back to the very first tweet at the top.
Okay, yep.
Okay, which is why, go right up a little high. Yeah, which is why, here's my main point, right? So RBT countries like the OECD or the UN understand the savings clause to protect their internal tax base. You know, we can't let this Anthony Aparent guy who lives in Croatia, you know, get a lower tax rate using that treaty. No, sir. And that Keith Redmond guy in France, same deal. We can't let him do that. But because of citizenship tax and FATCA, I mean, the U.S. has residence taxation for sure, right? So it's the same thing. You know, Keith Redmond in Washington, D.C. can't use the tax treaty to get a lower tax rate. Okay. But, all right, in addition to protecting the residential tax base, so to speak, by including citizenship in the savings clause, you see, not only does it protect the internal tax base, but it expands the tax base by claiming people with tax residency in other countries. You see that?
I do see that.
This is amazing stuff. Now, keep moving down a little bit, because what's fascinating is, and here's the point I want to make before we go through the tweets.
Yep.
You know, I mean, people always talk about the saving clause, but I actually spent a good part of yesterday afternoon taking a look at the evolution of savings clauses over the years. And I want to show you how they've gotten more and more intrusive as they've followed U.S. expatriation rules. So let's go back, for example, go back a little more, go a little higher. Yeah, now let's just go through the evolution here. Now, stop there. So I started with Romania in 1973. 1973, Romania. And this is a good starting point. Notice that it says, we already looked at this one, citizens or residents, okay? So at this point, the U.S. is just citizens or residents. Now, you know, remember, it was in 1966. That was the genesis of the expatriation rules. I don't know if they thought about this or not, but let's watch the expansion. This is going to be a trip around the world. It's fascinating. Now we go to 1982, Australia. All right, now let's look at how they're getting more and more sort of intrusive. So here we go now. Now remember, this is 1982. Okay, so it's all right. So it's residents and it's citizens, right? Okay, but now look at how they're defining citizen. For this purpose, the term citizen shall, with respect to the United States, include a former citizen whose loss of citizenship had as one of its principal purposes. Now, but only for 10 years, right? There's a 10-year limitation on that. The reason for that is the expatriation rules had an alternative tax regime that would allow them to tax for 10 years. But I just noticed something I missed yesterday reading this. And this is why, don't ever assume these tax treaties are the same. But you'll notice that it says, for this purpose, the term citizen shall, it says specifically with respect to United States source income. You see that? Okay, now that's interesting because that is not something that I've seen in a lot of other treaties. Notice also that it only applies if the principal purpose of renunciation was the avoidance of tax, right? So, this is an expansion in the Australian Treaty in 1982, right? It's an expansion. Doesn't have quite as much teeth as I think is intended to, but it definitely reflects the U.S. view that they want to tighten this up more and more and more, right? Okay, so let's continue going down. So that's 1982 Australia. Now here we go, 1992 Russia. You may remember what happened in Russia. Okay, in 1990, in the late 80s, early 90s, was that the Soviet Union fell. Better days were ahead, etc. And of course, the most important aspect of it was that it was time for Russia to have a new tax treaty with the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And now look at this one. This is very interesting, very interesting. Notwithstanding any provision of the convention except contracting state may tax in accordance with its domestic law residents, okay, as determined under Article 4. By the way, pause, sidebar for a second. The language always includes for residents as determined under the Article 4 of the residency rules, and that's what allows green card holders to tie break out of these treaties, right? A green card holder can tie break out of the treaties, usually under the residence rules, but a citizen can't. But now look at this thing in Russia. So citizens, but look at this. Former citizens, 1992, celebration of it's the United States' first tax treaty with Russia. What do? They get Russia to sign a treaty allowing the United States to impose tax on renounced former citizens forever. Look at this. But this is still just part of the evolution. I think it's fitting that that treaty be signed with Russia. All right. So that's 1992. Let's go back to the thread now. Okay. Whoa, 2000. Oh, got to move up a little bit here.
Okay, 2000. Yep. Okay.
Denmark. Now we're in Denmark in 2000. Denmark. Look at this. Notwithstanding any provision, blah, blah, blah. Remember, now these are the exceptions to the savings clause. Always a contracting state may tax its residents, again, as determined under Article 4 residents, meaning green card holders can get out. And by reason of citizenship may tax its citizens, okay, as if the convention had not come into effect. Now that's interesting. But now look what they've added here. For this purpose, the term citizen shall include a former citizen, or here we go. Now green card holders, long-term residents are sucked into this, right?
Oh, wow.
And but still, it's for, who had one of its principal purposes the avoidance of tax. I mean, how can anybody know what that is? But notice it's a 10-year limitation. Agreed?
Yep.
So that's Denmark in 2000. Let's go back and see where we are now.
All right.
2016, the model U.S. tax.
All right, here we go. Let's see it.
Well, here's what they're saying. Now, this is interesting. And I remember there was some discussion about this when it came up, but nobody can believe this is really going on, so it was quickly dropped. But here's the 2016 model tax treaty. Except to the extent provided in period, the convention shall not affect the taxation by contracting state of its residents. That's old stuff. And that part of it, I emphasize, is the same as the UN and OECD treaties, right? And its citizens. This is where the U.S. diversions. Okay, it reinforces citizenship tax. But now look at this. Notwithstanding the other provisions of this convention, a former citizen or former long-term resident of a contracting state may be taxed in accordance with the laws of that contracting state. Whoa. I mean, do you realize what that says?
You can't. Well, remember, I think you have a quote. You can check out, but you can never leave.
You can check out of your citizenship, but you can never leave. We own you. We have the right to tax you for life. Now, I want to emphasize that the U.S. currently has no law that does that. Okay, but it is very, very clear that any country that would sign that is agreeing, okay, to allow the U.S. to tax its former citizens forever. But then you must ask yourself, so what does that mean practically? And I think here's the disconnect in the minds of these treaty negotiators. What they don't understand is what it means. Croatia just signed this, and this tweet explains what it means in Croatia. Here's exactly what it means. From the perspective of Croatia, the saving clause found in paragraph 4 of Article 1 means except to the extent to provide in paragraph 5, this treaty shall not affect taxation by the United States of its residents as determined under Article 4. And now let's give this context. And residents of Croatia who happen to be U.S. citizens, right? I mean, the only meaning that citizens can have is citizens who happen to live in Croatia. Agreed?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's go back and read from the beginning. Except to the extent provided in paragraph 5 of this article, this treaty shall not affect the taxation by the United States of its residents. Well, that's old stuff. As determined under Article 4, green card holders can tie break out, maybe. But now, what does citizens actually mean in context? It's not an abstraction. What it means is residents of Croatia who happen to be U.S. citizens. Now, let's pause for a minute. That means the U.S. can impose its PFIC rules, its Subpart F rules, its phantom capital gain rules, any of this nonsense under the Internal Revenue Code. Croatia's just agreed they can do this to their own residents.
Well, isn't that the case right now? If a U.S. person is a resident,
well, that's exactly right. But they don't even understand now what it is they're signing. But now, for good measure, look at the second sentence.
Okay.
Notwithstanding the other provisions of this, a former U.S. citizen or former long-term U.S. green card holders or resident of Croatia may be taxed by the United States under the Internal Revenue Code. Now, how cool is that?
Oh, my.
I don't understand. I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I understand what you're saying, but what I don't understand is what's the purpose of renouncing U.S. citizenship then? It doesn't do you any good.
Well,
in Croatia.
At the present time, the United States. Now, okay, let me answer your question in this way. Just stay with me, Keith. So one might ask, why over the years have they continued to change this? Well, the reason is that the changes in the savings clause reflect the changes in the expatriation rules over the years, right? Which started in 1966 and 1996. There were big changes. In 2004, there were big changes. Now, at the present time, right, in 2008, the 10-year rule ended. Okay, the 10-year rule ended. And that may be why they got rid of the 10-year thing. At the present time, the U.S. has no law that allows it to tax former citizens or green card holders. But what this tax treaty clearly does is sort of sets up the structure, if you will, so that these countries have agreed in advance that should the United States want to enact a law saying, we don't care if you renounce, that's a matter of immigration law, but we own you forever. We own you forever. Okay, that these countries are agreeing in advance that the United States can impose worldwide taxation on any resident of the treaty partner country who was or is a U.S. citizen or green card holder. Okay, so the reasons to renounce are the same as they've always been. Okay, we're not there yet. But, I find it amazing that these countries even signed the initial version of these savings clauses. They're so ridiculous. But this is just over the top. I mean, it's clear to me that Croatia had no idea what it was signing. No idea at all.
No idea. And I would imagine the people who signed up for Croatia were likely compromised, probably U.S. assets. Probably not really, bamboozled isn't even a strong enough word for it. It's like you want this to happen. Now, my question is for Keith. Keith, you are a worldly man, and you know a lot of people around the world, a lot of countries. You run American expats group overseas. You contact people all the day. Can you tell me what constituency was clamoring for this tax treaty to be this? Can you tell me where these grassroots efforts to have these tax treaties come into place and these things, who are these people that you know of who are pushing for these residents overseas and people in the United States? Who are these people, these citizens who are demanding that these treaties be passed? Can you tell me about that?
You mean treaties like the one that was just passed in Croatia?
Yeah. Clearly,
clearly. Clearly, I know of no one who would want a treaty like this passed.
Wait a second. Then that would mean that we're ruled by people who aren't representing their
Americans overseas.
Well, they're not even representing Americans. It seems like they might be even representing someone completely different, that is themselves.
Yeah.
So this is, I mean, here's my point. This is clearly something no citizen, no person in the world wants. Rather, our bureaucratic overlords, it's what they want. And Croatia was likely picked because it's a hot country right now. And so, yeah, there were probably some U.S. persons who went over there and then, then buttered up their Croatian counterparts and had them sign this POS. Absolutely, absolutely horrifying. Now, I don't
And
want
the
to.
other thing, I
Yeah,
want to add one other point, if I may. Where I'm a
absolutely.
bit bemused by is, maybe this is too soon to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. That I think the key thing is, what American overseas organizations will address this, or even bring it to light, or even push back on it. That's a key thing. My thinking is, just based on my experience, none,
None. And
none.
as we talked about before, Democrats overseas represent Democrats, not anyone overseas. It's just an arm of the DNC, and they use people to get more power. They're
And
not
I'm just
after.
speaking generally on all
Yeah,
the American
and I don't,
overseas.
and
Yeah,
I'm not really a huge fan of Republicans either. They're
yeah.
just, they're the token opposition who always caves in and gives everything they want. So in a way, they're often, you could consider them worse than Democrats, because at least the Democrats are honest enough to lie to your face. Whereas the Republicans will hide their lies from you and promise you things, and then always sabotage you, and
Well, this
always.
this would be a key thing for American overseas organizations to really say, "Hey, wait a minute,
Yeah.
wait a minute."
Yeah, this is insane. Now, look, I do enjoy the U.S. Constitution because I like reading fiction. I enjoy reading fiction. The U.S. Constitution is one of the
It's
greatest fictional
aspirational.
things in the world. It's an idea that was immediately thrown out. It's ignored because they have a cute way. And I just want to show you something here, because some of you may be thinking, well, that's weird. Don't we have a treaty clause in the U.S. Constitution that? How is this all getting done? Well, I'm going to go to the Senate's page on treaties right here, so you can see how they're interpreting what their main mandate is here. Let me get to my screen share and show you how they look at this. Here is the Senate. This is how they claim it. They say the United States Constitution provides that the president shall have the power, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur. Okay, so when was this done? When were 2/3 of the senators present concurred for this tax treaty?
Well, this has not been passed yet, right? It's been signed, but this is the point. It now goes, for Senate consideration and presumptive approval, because nobody.
Right, and that's the thing. It's going to probably be approved, because if you look at how they ratify treaty, it says, oh no, we don't ratify the treaty.
So if it hasn't been ratified yet, this is an opportune time for American overseas organizations to get up on Capitol Hill and say,
It
"Wait a minute, wait a
absolutely
minute."
is. It absolutely is. And I think also Republicans generally as well. I mean, look, I'm not saying this is just simply, a true statement. Okay. The
Yeah,
2016 model U.S. tax treaty is a clear product of the Obama administration. Okay. And, the Biden administration is the first administration to try to implement this as well. There is, I would say, no possibility that any group representing the Democrats is gonna stand up for anybody on this. And I think that people, for one, I don't think the problem is, I've said before, Americans abroad are not going to fight back. I mean, they'll continue voting, in the
right.
way they do,
The
etc.
same way they do. Yeah.
So, so John, does this mean that if everything goes quote unquote well, and this is ratified, that the Croatia U.S. tax treaty is going to be the example of subsequent tax treaties with other countries moving forward, or renewed tax
I don't
treaties?
think so. I
I
mean,
do.
maybe yes, maybe no. But I mean, the U.S. model tax treaty is a starting point, and I think that these countries, for example, in Australia right now, there's public discussion of tax treaties, and I think that this needs to be front and center in the discussion of Australia. It's time to get these
Yep.
savings clauses out of these treaties, or one might rewrite the savings clause. This could be an opportunity for countries to rewrite the saving clause to make it clear that it doesn't apply to a U.S. citizen who's actually a resident of Australia or another country. In other words, sort of a dual citizenship or a dual resident exception of the saving clause, in the same way that green card holders can tie break out of it, then citizens ought to be able to either. But my point is that the people who negotiate treaties for other countries have really got to wise up and understand how the United States is using these tax treaties, not in a defensive way to protect its own tax base, but as an offensive weapon to expand its tax base into other countries through three main components: citizenship-based taxation, FATCA, and the savings clause of these treaties. Now, if the U.S. is wedded to citizenship taxation, all right, there's still the opportunity, in my view, for the rest of the world to fight back and say, well, you know what? You can do what you want in your own country. You can even tax your citizens over international waters. But let me just tell you this: when your citizens become residents of our country and qualify as tax residents of our country, no, absolutely not. We will not sign an agreement that will permit you to impose your rules of worldwide taxation according to your domestic tax code on the tax residents of other countries. We will not do that. And I think that's, an obvious, reasonable position. And I think that is something that every group of Americans abroad in every country can start publicizing this and pressuring their own governments to stop enabling this nonsense through these savings clauses, which clearly are getting worse and worse.
Yeah, and I would say anyone in Croatia, maybe you want to put some pressure on the people signing this, and say, hey, share this video to them. You're not being well respected is one thing, and it's kind of humiliating yourself. You're it's very embarrassing. I was thinking about something, and this is where I want to. We don't have too much time left, and this is where I want to conclude today, because we see that this is the absolute fact. We see the groundwork laying. This is the groundwork to tax people who are not citizens of the U.S. and who do not live in the U.S. This is the groundwork for it. Mm-hmm. There's no question about it. Now, one of the things that comes up, and we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, and this is sort of a common theme, and it's a common theme I talk when people call me. They comment, and I talk to the viewers here and clients. Terrorism, financial terrorism. That's what we have, because no one in the world is actually requesting this. There's not one person in the world who thinks this is a good idea who's impacted by it. It's only people who aren't impacted by it and stand to profit from it who think it's a good idea. So, what I did is I just want to say, what is the definition of terrorism? Well, I just went to DuckDuckGo and searched it. What's a definition of terrorism? And guys, I want to see your what you think of this here. Here's what they say. They say terrorism, noun, the use of violence or the threat of violence, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political goals. 2, resort to terrorizing methods as a mean of coercion, or the state of fear and submission produced by the prevalence of such method. 3, the act of terrorizing or state of being terrorized, a mode of government by terror or intimidation.
Yep.
Kind of nailed it, huh?
It's nailed it. That's why I use the term that the U.S. terrorizes its citizens living overseas. And now it's expanding. Yep.
Right. And this is complete terrorism. That is what we have here. We have a out of control government who is actively terrorizing us, making people, their lives impossible or miserable. I mean, people are on the edge and freaked out a little bit. People overseas, I got a call from someone yesterday. He was incredibly nervous about his situation. And he said, Anthony, there's a letter for me at the post office and I'm afraid to pick it up. I said, I don't want to pick it up because the IRS it's going to make it operative. I said, hey, you know what? I said, you got to pick up that letter. Whether you pick it up or not, just pick it up, know what it is. So he got back to me this morning and he says, actually, I was so freaked out. I read the slip wrong. It was something my wife ordered from eBay. It wasn't from the IRS. And he lost. And honestly, people sometimes, really get to the edge. And I've talked to people suicidal before. because this has got them so tweaked. And people,
I
I'm
agree.
sure, have killed themselves over this because they don't see a way out. And that is, we need to call it what it is. And I think that's the best state. So I think, people always ask, hey, what can we do to spread the message? Well, maybe we need to spread the message of the truth that the IRS is terrorism. Fact. And that's a fact. Anything else to add, gentlemen? What do you have to add to that, Keith?
Well, I agree with you. The IRS, terrorizes, but I even take it much broader because the IRS is the enforcement tool. So it's the United States government and what it does. It's Congress. It's consistent, persistent terrorism, and it never ends. Never ends to people living over, to its citizens living overseas. And now it doesn't matter whether you're a citizen or not.
Well, yeah, we'll see. And I mean, the groundwork's laid, and I don't even know if they would actually require a law. I mean, we know that they don't need a law. They haven't defined individual in the individual income tax. So why do they need to define? So by regulation, they could just say, okay, well, if you're a former citizen, we're going to tax you too. I don't think.
Anthony, on that point, I would agree with you entirely. Okay, that they can do that because, the basis for taxing citizens it's not laid out in the Internal Revenue Code, so it's laid out in the Treasury regulation under Section 1. So absolutely right. I mean, all Treasury would have to do is just change the meaning of individual to anybody who either is or was a U.S. citizen or resident. That's it.
That's it. And
Congress wouldn't even have to do it.
That's right. And so that's wow. And I think that's the point we need to understand, that this gets ratified. My opinion, that's it. And then, once that definition is changed, through regulation, will they even need much more tax treaties to do it? They'll just do it. They'll just say, okay, we're going to do it anyway.
I think that they would need, they've done it under domestic law, right? But the question is, how do you enforce your domestic law outside the United States? And there's an analogy here. We can look at FATCA IGAs, we can look at extradition treaties, and we can look at tax treaties. And what all three things have in common is that they either get the agreement of or they coerce other governments to implement these kinds of policies for them, right? So it's a combination of these things. I mean, I think that, it's a different topic, but there's clear overlap between tax treaties, extradition treaties, and FATCA IGAs, I think. But that's a separate discussion. Yeah. For the moment, I think what's important for people to understand is the direction that this is moving. I mean, I've tried to lay out the evolution of these savings clauses to show you how they get tighter and tighter and how they're a function of domestic U.S. tax laws, and how it has reached the point in unusually clear language, all right, that the 2016 model U.S. tax treaty as implemented in Croatia, clearly the treaty partner is agreeing that the United States can impose taxation on former citizens and residents who live in that country. And there's no reasonable argument. That's exactly what it says. It's unusually clear. And it reminds me of a great book, a novel or play, I guess it was, Biederman and the Brandstift years ago when I was in a German class, where, basically what happens is a middle-class guy, and he lets some guy into his house to stay the night. And the guy says, I'm going to burn your house down. And, the homeowner doesn't believe him. No, it can't be true. The guy, no, I'm going to burn your house down. Homeowner doesn't believe him. Well, right now, the evidence is completely clear. The language is uncharacteristically clear. But I bet you 99% of Americans say, oh, no, they're not going to do that. Treaty says, no, we're going to tax your former citizens and residents. These treaty, they're probably, oh, no. They wouldn't do that. Right there, really clear. Well, what is it you don't understand? We're going to tax your former citizens and residents. Oh, no. They can't possibly mean that.
Right. Anthony, why else is it there? Why did they put that language in there unless they meant to do that?
Well, yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe it was an accident.
Yeah, right. The accident, right? Yeah. So there it is, folks. Here we're seeing it. This is financial terrorism. Let's get active here and let's really call it out for what it is, and continue watching this channel. Continue commenting. Help us out. Come up with content ideas. And if you think you'd be a great guest, our email is on here below. Contact us. We have a lot more things coming up. Things are really, really heating up here. This is Anthony Parent for John Richardson and Keith Redmond for IRSMedic. Thank you so much for joining us today.